This woman named Sophie destroyed her entire life in less than a year. She lost her children, her family, her reputation, and the man who spent years caring for their kids while she climbed the corporate ladder. And when he discovered her betrayal, instead of apologizing, she looked him dead in the eye and told him it was his fault for not having a real job. I'm Emma, and today I'm sharing a story that will make you question everything you thought you knew about marriage, ambition, and the price we pay for chasing what we think we deserve. Sophie is 29 years old, and when she first reached out to share her story, she wanted the world to understand her side. She wanted people to know that she wasn't the villain everyone painted her to be. But as you listen to what happened, you'll have to decide for yourself whether she was justified in her choices or whether she made mistakes that cost her everything. 11 years ago, Sophie met a man named Rome in college. Back then, he was different. He had dreams. He talked about the future with excitement in his eyes. He made plans and seemed ready to conquer the world alongside her. Sophie thought she'd found her perfect partner, someone who would build a life with her step by step, brick by brick. But something changed over the years. Rome started struggling with the pressure of school. He dropped out, claiming the stress was too much to handle. Then came the jobs, one after another, none of them lasting more than 6 months. There was always a reason, always an excuse. The boss was demanding. The coworkers were difficult. The pay wasn't worth his effort. And Sophie, because she loved him, believed every word. When their first child arrived, they made a practical decision. Childcare was expensive, and Sophie had a stable career. It made sense for Rome to stay home temporarily. But temporary turned into permanent when their second baby came along. Suddenly, Sophie found herself as the sole provider for a family of 4, while Rome settled into the role of stay-at-home dad. Now let me pause here for a moment. Being a stay-at-home parent is one of the hardest jobs in the world. It requires patience, organization, energy, and constant attention. Many people thrive in this role and create beautiful, stable homes for their families. But according to Sophie, that wasn't what was happening in her house. She would come home after long, exhausting days at work to find their home in complete disarray. Toys scattered across every surface, dishes piling up in the sink, laundry sitting unfolded in baskets for days. And Rome would greet her with complaints about how difficult his day had been, as if he expected sympathy for doing what she considered basic parenting. Sophie felt herself drowning under the weight of financial responsibility. Every bill, every expense, every budget decision fell on her shoulders. They couldn't afford vacations. They couldn't upgrade their aging appliances. They couldn't even enjoy a simple dinner out without Sophie calculating whether it would destroy their tight budget. She tried talking to him about returning to work, maybe finishing his degree, maybe finding steady employment that would ease the financial burden crushing them. But Rome always had a response ready. The job market was terrible. He needed to wait until both kids were in school full-time. He wasn't qualified for anything that paid well. Every conversation ended the same way, with nothing changing and Sophie feeling more alone than before. The resentment grew slowly, like poison spreading through her veins. She began to see Rome not as her partner, but as another dependent she had to support. Another person taking from her without giving back. And the more she provided, the more invisible she felt. Then, 7 months before everything collapsed, someone new started working at Sophie's office. I'm not going to use his name because honestly, his identity doesn't matter. What matters is what he represented to Sophie in that moment of her life. This coworker was everything Rome wasn't. He was ambitious, driven, organized. He talked about his goals with clarity and worked toward them with determination. He had side projects and investment plans and a clear vision for his future. The contrast between this man and Sophie's husband was striking and, in her words, embarrassing. At first, their interactions were purely professional. Casual workplace conversations about projects and deadlines. But gradually, those conversations became more personal. Sophie found herself sharing frustrations about her marriage that she'd never voiced to anyone else. And this coworker listened with genuine interest, something she hadn't experienced in years. He would compliment her work ethic. He would mention how impressed he was by everything she managed to handle. He would tell her how lucky her family was to have someone so capable and driven. These words were like water to someone dying of thirst in the desert. Sophie couldn't remember the last time Rome had acknowledged anything she contributed beyond her paycheck. The conversations continued. They started having coffee together. Then lunch became a regular thing. The topics grew deeper, more intimate. Sophie shared details about her disconnected marriage, while this man validated every feeling she'd been suppressing for years. Looking back, Sophie admits she could see where things were heading, but she felt justified in continuing. She told herself she deserved this connection. She deserved to feel valued and appreciated. If Rome had been the partner she needed, she wouldn't have been so receptive to attention from someone else. The texting started innocently enough. Funny messages about their workday, comments about office situations, but those texts evolved into something much deeper. They were texting late into the night while Rome fell asleep watching television. They were sharing thoughts and dreams and fears that married people are supposed to share with their spouses. Sophie noticed every difference between the two men with painful clarity. Her coworker mentioned taking weekend courses to advance his career while Rome spent weekends gaming and watching sports. Her coworker discussed financial planning and investment strategies, while Rome couldn't even be bothered to look for better employment. The messages became flirtatious. Inside jokes that crossed obvious lines, compliments that were definitely inappropriate for coworkers. Good morning texts that arrived before Rome even woke up. Sophie had a secret source of happiness that was entirely her own, and she protected it fiercely. She should have felt guilty. She knew that. But instead, she felt justified. If Rome had been the partner she needed, this wouldn't be happening. If he'd shown even half the interest in her thoughts and feelings that this coworker showed, she wouldn't have needed this connection. For the first time in years, Sophie felt seen. Someone actually wanted to know what she thought about things. Someone was genuinely interested in who she was beyond what she could provide financially, and she wasn't ready to give that up, regardless of the consequences waiting just around the corner. Then came the Tuesday night that changed everything forever. Sophie was in the shower when Rome's phone kept buzzing on the bathroom counter. He called out, asking her to check who was calling in case it was about the kids. So she glanced at the screen. That's when she saw her coworker's name with text message notifications, and her stomach dropped because she'd been texting him from her phone downstairs. But somehow Rome was receiving the messages too. It turned out Sophie had been logged into her messaging app on Rome's old tablet, the one they'd given to their kids, and everything had been syncing automatically. Every message, every flirtation, every complaint about Rome, all of it had been copying to a device in their own home. When Sophie got out of the shower, Rome was sitting on their bed with that tablet in his hands, scrolling through months of conversations. His face showed an expression she'd never seen before. Not anger exactly, something deeper. Confusion mixed with hurt, mixed with complete betrayal. "Who is this?" he asked quietly, showing her one of their more obviously flirtatious exchanges. Sophie could have lied. She could have minimized what he was seeing, but in that moment, she felt almost relieved that everything was finally out in the open. She was tired of hiding, tired of pretending their marriage was something it wasn't. She tried explaining that it wasn't what it looked like, that they were just friends, that nothing physical had ever happened between them. But while she was talking, Rome kept reading. He found conversations where Sophie had vented about their marriage, complained about carrying all the responsibility alone, admitted she felt more emotionally connected to her coworker than to her own husband. "You told him I don't have a real job," Rome said, his voice staying quiet, but carrying something underneath she'd never heard before. "You told a complete stranger that I'm basically a deadbeat dad who plays games all day while you do everything." That's when Sophie snapped. The way he said it, like she was the villain for telling the truth, pushed her past her breaking point. "Well, what would you call it, Rome?" she fired back. "You don't work. You don't contribute financially. You can't even keep our house clean while I'm working myself to exhaustion to support us. What should I have told him? Should I have bragged about your amazing career?" The fight that followed was unlike anything they'd ever experienced. Rome started listing everything he supposedly did around the house. How he took care of their children day after day. How he'd been trying to find better work opportunities. But Sophie was done pretending those excuses were enough. "Trying isn't the same as doing," she told him coldly. "I've been carrying this entire family for years while you figure yourself out. When is that going to end? When are you going to actually become a partner instead of another dependent? So you decided to find someone else while you wait? Rome shot back, trying to make her feel guilty. But Sophie wasn't having it. The truth was pouring out of her now, and she couldn't stop it even if she wanted to. "I found someone who treats me like an equal instead of a walking paycheck," she said, meaning every single word. "Someone who has actual goals and real ambition and doesn't think the world owes him something just for existing. Maybe if you'd gotten your life together years ago, I wouldn't have needed to find that connection elsewhere." The silence that followed was deafening. Rome stared at her like he was seeing her clearly for the very first time. But Sophie meant everything she'd said, and she wasn't taking any of it back just to make him feel better about his choices. After that explosive fight, things changed completely, but not in the way Rome hoped. Instead of feeling ashamed about what she'd said, Sophie felt liberated. Finally, the truth was out there in the open. No more pretending, no more walking on eggshells around his feelings about his lack of direction. Rome wanted her to cut off all contact with her coworker immediately, which Sophie found completely ridiculous since they worked together every single day. "I can't just ignore someone I collaborate with professionally," she told him. "Maybe if you actually had a job, you'd understand how workplace relationships work." Rome didn't like hearing that, but Sophie believed it was true. How could someone who hadn't held steady employment in years possibly understand professional dynamics? What frustrated Sophie most was how Rome kept making everything about her betrayal, instead of addressing the real issues in their marriage. He obsessed over the emotional affair like that was the actual problem when, in her mind, it was just a symptom of something much deeper. The real problem was being married to someone who'd given up on himself and expected her to be okay with it indefinitely. Sophie didn't stop texting her coworker. Why should she? Rome had made it crystal clear over the years that her emotional needs weren't a priority, so she'd found someone who actually cared what she thought and felt. Meanwhile, Rome suddenly wanted deep conversations about their marriage. What did Sophie need? How could they fix things? What would it take to save what they had? But to Sophie, it felt like too little, too late. Where was this concern when she was drowning in responsibility while he played house? Where was this emotional investment when she worked late every night and came home to complete chaos? Rome started making what Sophie considered obviously performative gestures, actually cleaning the house without being asked, researching job opportunities online, making an effort with the kids that seemed more intentional than before. But it all felt fake to Sophie, like he was only trying because he'd been caught, not because he genuinely wanted to change. "You shouldn't need me to have an emotional affair for you to want to improve your life," she told him bluntly. "The fact that it took this to motivate you says absolutely everything." Her conversations with her coworker became even more important during this tumultuous time. While Rome sulked around their house acting like the victim, Sophie had someone reminding her that she deserved better than what she was getting. They talked seriously about what it would be like being with someone who actually matched your energy, someone who didn't drain you with their lack of drive and ambition, someone who contributed equally instead of taking constantly. Rome was clearly hoping Sophie would feel guilty enough to recommit to their marriage, but his response to everything just confirmed what she already knew deep down. He was more concerned with controlling what she did than with actually becoming the partner she desperately needed. When he'd get upset about her staying late at work or texting during family dinner time, Sophie would remind him that he'd lost the right to make demands when he decided that providing for his family wasn't his responsibility. The worst part, in Sophie's view, was watching Rome play the victim with their friends and family. He portrayed himself as this loving husband who'd been blindsided by a heartless wife who decided to cheat for absolutely no reason. He conveniently left out how he'd been coasting through life while she carried every single burden. Sophie felt that people didn't understand what it was really like. Being essentially a single parent who just happened to be legally married to another child who needed constant management. 10 months after everything exploded into the open, Sophie's life looked nothing like she thought it would, and she's still trying to process how everything went so catastrophically wrong so quickly. The divorce was finalized 2 months ago, and the entire process was a nightmare Sophie never anticipated. It turns out that having your emotional affair partner testify about your marital unhappiness doesn't look great in family court proceedings, especially when your husband's lawyer paints you as someone who abandoned her family responsibilities for a workplace fling. Rome was awarded primary custody of their children. Sophie gets them every other weekend and on Wednesday nights, which feels to her like being a guest in their lives instead of their mother. The judge mentioned stability in the ruling, how the children were used to their father being the primary caregiver, how disrupting that routine would be harmful to them. The irony wasn't lost on Sophie. The same thing she'd criticized Rome for, the same role she'd resented him playing, became the exact reason he got to keep their children. Now Sophie pays child support, which feels like a cruel joke considering Rome still doesn't have what anyone would call a substantial career. She's basically funding the exact lifestyle she resented for all those years. But here's what really devastated Sophie. Her coworker completely disappeared once things got legally messy. It turned out that all those deep conversations about being with someone who matched her energy were just talk. Empty words. The moment Sophie's divorce became real and complicated, he started pulling back fast. "I don't want to get involved in family drama," he told her, like he hadn't been actively encouraging her to leave Rome for months. Now he acts like they barely know each other at work. Sophie has to see him every single day, pretending their connection never existed, pretending those months of intimate conversations meant nothing. Work became unbearable very quickly. Some of their private messages got leaked during the divorce proceedings, and now everyone in the office knows she was talking badly about her husband with a coworker. Sophie's boss called it unprofessional conduct and said it created a hostile work environment. She's not getting fired, but she's definitely not getting promoted anytime soon either. All those extra hours she put in, all that dedication she showed, none of it matters anymore when people think you're the type to air your personal business at the office. The financial hit has been absolutely brutal. Sophie is paying child support every month. She's covering rent for her own apartment. She's dealing with massive legal fees from the divorce. All of this on a salary that used to support 4 people but now has to stretch even further. Rome's lawyer ensured he got alimony for 3 years, while he supposedly transitions back into the workforce. So Sophie is essentially paying her ex-husband to continue not working while he raises her children in the house she helped purchase. Her family has been disappointingly unsupportive through all of this. Sophie's sister keeps telling her that she threw away a good man, that Rome was always there for the kids when it mattered. Sophie's mother won't even talk to her directly anymore. She goes through Sophie's sister for any necessary communication. They all act like Sophie is some kind of monster who destroyed a happy family for absolutely no reason. Nobody acknowledges that she carried that family financially for years while Rome figured himself out. Nobody gives her credit for all those sacrifices. The loneliness Sophie feels now is probably the hardest part of everything. She thought she'd feel free and liberated after leaving her marriage, but instead, she feels more trapped than when she was married. The coworker moved on like she never mattered to him at all. Rome has built this new life with their kids where Sophie is just a visitor twice a month. Everyone treats her like the villain for wanting something better for herself. Sophie's apartment is depressing and quiet. She comes home to complete silence every night. No kids asking for homework help. No one fighting over toys. No one needing dinner prepared. Weekends without her children stretch on forever. She tries filling the time with hobbies and television shows, but nothing helps the crushing emptiness. And Rome? Rome seems to be absolutely thriving without her, which is the most infuriating part of everything. He got a decent job just 2 months after their divorce was finalized. Something he'd claimed was completely impossible when they were married. He has the kids on a structured routine now. The house looks better than it ever did when Sophie lived there. And from what she can tell, he seems genuinely happy with his new life. Sometimes Sophie wonders if he was playing the helpless husband role the entire time, just to keep her trapped in that provider dynamic. Maybe he was always capable of more, but chose not to show it while they were together. The kids seem perfectly fine with the new arrangement, which somehow hurts more than Sophie expected. They've adjusted to splitting time between 2 houses. They don't seem particularly upset about the divorce. Sometimes Sophie overhears them talking about things they do with their dad now that they never did when the family all lived together. Cooking projects, long bike rides, building elaborate forts. Part of her wonders if they're actually happier without the constant tension that came from Sophie and Rome fighting all the time. Her coworker, the man she threw everything away for, started dating someone from another department about 6 weeks ago. They seem happy together, doing all the couple things he used to talk about wanting to do with Sophie. This new girlfriend is younger, doesn't have kids, probably doesn't carry the heavy baggage of being a divorced working mother. Sophie has to see them together sometimes in the break room or at office events. It feels like being stabbed repeatedly, watching him live out the future he dangled in front of her like a carrot. Looking back now, people expect Sophie to say she regrets everything, that she should have tried harder to fix her marriage, that she should have been more patient with Rome's journey. But Sophie says honestly, she regrets how everything played out, but not the choices themselves. She believed she deserved better than what Rome was offering. She believed she deserved a partner who matched her drive and ambition, someone who didn't need to be carried through basic adult responsibilities. The fact that it didn't work out the way she hoped doesn't mean she was wrong about what she needed. At least, that's what she tells herself. Sometimes Sophie thinks about what might have happened if she'd kept quiet. If she'd stayed in her lane and accepted that Rome would never change, maybe they'd still be married. Maybe she'd still have her kids full-time. Maybe she wouldn't be paying him to live the life she used to subsidize. But then she remembers how suffocated she felt in that marriage, how invisible and unappreciated she was day after day. And she knows she couldn't have kept that up forever without completely breaking. The universe doesn't always reward people for going after what they want. And apparently, this was one of those times where the pursuit of happiness led to losing everything. But Sophie refuses to pretend she was wrong for wanting more than what she was getting, even if everyone in her life thinks she should have been grateful for what she had. Rome is doing fine now. Better than fine, actually. The kids are fine. Everyone has moved on with their lives. Sophie is the only one left stuck dealing with the consequences of wanting something different. This is Emma, your storyteller here on Mrs. Emma's channel, and I want to know what you think about Sophie's story. Was she justified in her feelings about Rome's lack of ambition? Or did she destroy a family over resentment that she could have worked through? If this story made you feel something, hit that like button right now. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And please, subscribe to our channel so you never miss stories like this one. These are real experiences from real people, and your engagement helps us continue bringing these powerful stories to light. I'll see you in the next story. Until then, remember that every choice we make has consequences, and sometimes we don't realize the true cost until it's far too late.